Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is the Right Side of History, or the person who runs the Right Side of History TM Twitter account, who I found when she wrote a thread detailing the Marxist influence of not only Marxist feminism, but also queer theory and how they are all of the same ideological clade or genealogy. I thought her writing was very interesting and smart to boot, and so I had her on, and in this conversation we talk about her position as a 24-year-old Gen Z female coming on the scene and distrusting the collectivist ideology that a lot of her cohort is adopting as a matter of course. And as the conversation goes on, we talk about radical feminism, or sex positive and sex negative feminism, and why they are at war now, and why these groups behave in the way that they do, such as calling me a sexual predator for suppressing the desire to wave at a pretty woman, which is something that just happened to me on Twitter by a Marxist feminist, or a radical feminist who has Marxist leanings. And so the Right Side of History makes sense of all this by laying out the fundamentals of Marxism, or German idealism, and how that manifests in certain political ideologies. Found it fascinating, and it's always great to talk to a young person who's got their head screwed on straight and is really trying to find their way in the world, and to see somebody at that stage of life engaging with these ideas full-heartedly and with an open mind. So without further ado, here is the Right Side of History. How did you get into what you're getting into, or what you've gotten into? What's your credibility and what's your drive behind it?
So my freshman year of college, I went to a liberal art. It was like a STEM focused liberal arts school. And my first year in the all female dorm, there was a trans identified male on the same floor, and we had like communal bathrooms and showers. So I was like, this is weird. And luckily, like, there was two bathrooms on the floor and he was in the other one. So that was never a problem because I was on the opposite side, but that weirded me out. And I noticed, like, progressively as time went on throughout undergrad, it got worse and worse. Like now professors were asking you pronouns, and like asking your pronouns in class along with your introduction. We had like different like seminars on campus that were like woke aligned, and there'd be like different like public performances, like social justice performances in the cafeteria. It was weird. And then towards the end, my friends were all people I was friends with. They were all like centrist, right leaning, and I would make like I had no problem making like trans jokes in front of them. And towards the end, they all like got woke, and it got very uncomfortable because I couldn't like joke about it because everyone would go like silent. And this was like towards my junior year, and then we all got kicked out because of COVID. But they weren't like that in the beginning. And I remember when I was a freshman, I used to troll. I had a Trump flag that I put in my dorm room window. And when it was dark out, my room, the way it was, my building was oriented, you could see my window from across campus. And so when I turned the light on, the Trump flag glowed across campus. I voted libertarian. I just wanted to, I was annoyed.
Huh.
So I just wanted to be a troll. But I had a bunch of people complain to my RA and try to get my RA to get me to take it down. Didn't take it down. So left it up. But let's just say I wasn't super popular.
And you were fine with that?
Yeah.
No. Well, what makes you not susceptible to the wokery, you think?
I'm a military brat, so I've lived all over the world, all over the country. I lived in Germany, Kenya. Um, Kenya was actually my first introduction to queer theory. I was at a Christian school in Kenya. This is like 2013, 2014. Because my dad was with the embassy. And my Bible teacher, he came into Bible class and he was wearing, we had Bible class, like normal class. It was like 4 days a week and we had chapel 1 day a week. But he came in like a V-neck dress and his nails painted. I was like 14, 13 at the time, 14. And he basically like he did this. He wore a dress to Bible class because he was trying to show us that like basically these expressivity of gender is like a subjective, personal thing that you can like you can express yourself in a wide variety of ways. And this was the Bible. He went to like a seminary school in Oregon. But this was like the school in Kenya was a Methodist, Assembly of God, and Mennonite like establishment. I'm pretty sure he was Methodist. I'm not sure, but that was
well, method acting. That's for sure.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
A method acting.
Oh, yeah.
So you have libertarian leanings. You're cultured. You're worldly. Do you have like a religious foundation too, or like what's your relationship to
I
traditional
grew
belief?
up Pentecostal Assembly of God. I'm an agnostic atheist now.
Okay, yeah. Right. So you kind of you're a skeptical person.
Yeah, largely. That's part of one of the things that made me like because when I turned 18, I went to school. Like I had already been identifying as agnostic in high school. But like when I got to undergrad, like the gender stuff, it felt like another religion. And that's how I first like my spidey senses went off, so to speak. Because it was like a similar, like there was ritual, there was like professions of faith, like public repentance.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I just left the religion. I don't want to join a new one. Thanks.
Yeah. And what about, you said you didn't have a lot of friends. So what about the cost benefit analysis of being a troll? Like, does that like, you look at your life and how it's going, you're like, wait, I'm going to be pretty lonely because everybody else is following this herd. And is there like an aspect of loneliness to that, and do you lean into that, or do you find common allies or comrades?
I've been in school since I'm like 24 now. I've been in school since I was 18. I'm doing a dual degree program right now. So I don't really have time to worry about being lonely. But no, they weren't like my friends in undergrad. They didn't stop being friends with me. It became filtered. Yeah.
And now you're in grad school. Has the wokeness, like, have you found a department or a corner where it's not infiltrated, or is it just like systemic throughout
I'm doing a dual
years?
Law degree and Master of Biomedical Engineering.
Okay.
And the law side is obviously a lot more woke than the engineering side. It's like night and day. I take like, there's been classes at the law school where specifically this class was like it was titled like something like reproductive rights in the law or something like that, and the professor did not use the word woman. She said pregnant person, like uterus havers, birth givers, and it was like a class about like reproductive I should have known justice. But I remember like after like the first or second class, I looked up the syllabus, and every single author of every single one of the papers she had us read was an admitted Marxist. I looked them all up.
A what? A what kind of Marxist?
Admitted Marxist, like
admitted.
overt Marxist. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Huh. And you said bioengineering?
Biomedical engineering.
Biomedical engineering. What is that?
My
largely?
undergrad's in biochemistry, and
Okay.
so basically it's you're developing applications or doing research for future like medical technologies. But I'm going into patent law, which is why I'm doing the dual degree.
Okay. But biomedical engineering is like I hear that and I think of, the island of Dr. Maru, like the SMED scientist stuff. Is that what they do? They like design cells and
Yeah, we do cell, but we do cell culture. We
Neuralink.
do some CRISPR, some gene editing, but a lot of what
Wow.
we're doing in my lab has to do with basically fluorescent decay and mitochondrial diseases, redox ratios, measuring like mitochondrial function and cell function in
Okay.
under different conditions, parameters, and we do a lot of computational modeling. So we use different programs like SciBee, MATLAB to just create programs that can model a biological system.
Okay. Have you always been kind of like able to operate on that level of abstraction? And are you a technical person?
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet you still feel things when there's a man passing as a woman in your dorm room. So
What do you
you're
mean
not.
feel things?
I'm just. I was making a stupid joke about like if you're really brainy, but you still have your spidey senses are still connected.
Well, the so because that one like it's like you're forcing someone to accept a lie habitually, or not only like accept a lie, but like repeat it and like be exposed to it constantly. So it's not necessarily just
Hmm.
like some like morality feeling or feeling that it's wrong. It's like it feels wrong because it's conceptually wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Huh. And when did you start posting on Twitter under the right side of history?
Um, it was
And
after I got
why?
banned on Reddit.
Oh, you got banned on Reddit.
Yeah, I got a permaban on Reddit.
What did you say now?
Well, it was in the law school subreddit. And there was something about gender, and I can't even remember I don't even remember what I said. It was relatively mild, but I got banned from the subreddit, and like I messaged the moderator. I'm like I didn't break any rules. Why did I get banned? And the mod responded to me, and they were like, if you like respond to this chat again, I'm going to like forward you or escalate this to the Reddit admin. And I was like, ooh, I'm so scared. And then like 12 hours later, I found out because of that, I'd been permanently banned from Reddit.
Okay.
And so that's when I started using Twitter, because that was around the time Elon Musk. That was
About a year ago.
August of 2021. Was that? I think that's right. Um, is when I started like being active, and then I started like posting more and more. But I never really used it before August
Yeah.
2021.
What was the use of Twitter for you? Like, was it social or was it like interacting with ideas? Like,
Yeah, mostly ideas, most like politics, because that's what I did on Reddit before I got banned.
Yeah.
Just like politics, like posting like different studies, etc.
Okay. But what do you think your domain is, or like what you're attracted to, like subject matter wise, like when you post articles or research papers and
Um,
stuff like that?
I'm specifically attracted to most of it is like basically critical theory, or like critical theory, Marxism,
Yeah.
or like Hegelian aspects in or being conceptually slipped into research and how that's affecting research, how that's affecting like funding from government agencies, how that's affecting like the stock market, because with ESG, like the conflict between like fiduciary duty and stakeholder capitalism.
Yeah.
There's that conflict. It's all stuff relating to that, like basically a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Well, what do you think your generation is going to do with what they're being handed, which is kind of a pile of shit, but your generation is being indoctrinated or inculcated into Marxist critical theory and stuff like that. Do you think
Yeah,
that
it's
your
not easy.
generation is going to get
Yeah,
wise to that?
I'm Gen Z. technically probably run right on the cutoff, but yeah, it's not going to be.
No.
I would say politics isn't really brought up in the engineering department, but it is in the law all the time. Like, for example, if there's any type of like adjacently political topic in the law school, it's only like people who are left leaning or leftist raising their hand and discussing it, because like people don't like, because it's like not acceptable to have even like the appearance of right leaning beliefs in public.
Yeah.
But
Why? What's so nasty about right-wing beliefs?
it's just not cool. It's not necessarily that it's like considered like morally bad. It's like secular puritanism. And so it's not even necessarily that, like, if you ask them, they normally can't actually articulate why they think something is bad. It's like a knee-jerk reaction, like almost like, I don't, like, I guess like when you go up religious, like that like, I don't want to say brainwashing, but like you're taught your religious beliefs from a small age, and like you kind of had that automatic processing about like,
Yeah.
as you like go through your environment about like what's right and what's wrong, and you filter like your observations through the lens of your religion. That's what they're doing, and it's like automatic processing. They're not actually like critically examining like what they're doing or why they're doing it, and they often can't tell you why, but it's because they've been brainwashed since
Yeah.
very small.
And it's socially reinforced, and then it's institutionally reinforced too. I just wonder, have you seen in your, among your cohort, people who were rather that way, and then they kind of get that so-called red pill, or like be interrupted by cognitive dissonance to such a degree that they have to start to reformulate their belief system? Or
So I haven't noticed that in law school. I haven't made a lot of friends in like law school and the engineering school, simply because I'm taking over 20 credit hours.
yeah.
So it's not a lot of extra time. But in undergrad, there wasn't really, it was all left shift. Everyone like started out center right that I was around, and they all shifted to the left. But I didn't really notice anyone like become more right leaning at any point. It was always shift left.
Where did you go?
I've always been right leaning. Like when I had like a political Instagram in like middle school or high school, where I did like right leaning like trolling on Instagram when I was like 14.
Yeah, why? Why? Because that's the edge.
I like being an agitator. I like
Okay. Yeah.
I like making people uncomfortable. Almost like
I got accused of that just the other day, making people uncomfortable. For saying that I have a desire to wave to pretty women on the street.
I saw.
You saw that?
I saw that.
Which brings me to how you made a banger thread taking down feminist Marxist. And that was in the midst of this whole like uprising of the gender critical feminists about a man in a dress, and they want to do dress codes, or there's fetish gear, and there's all this reading of like, how do we impose people safeguarding and stuff like that. I don't know to what degree you were involved in that, but I'm wondering from your point of view, I don't know to what degree you're even interested in the gender topic itself, other than the fact there's probably like the factual thing that you have an issue with. But I'm wondering, because you chimed in about feminist Marxism, I'm wondering like what your take on feminism is, the bounds of it, the unboundedness of it, the goodness of it, the badness of it. As a woman, like, what does it do for you? Does it do anything for you? Does it do anything for you?
More so a spectator to that whole.
Yeah, you're just a spectator, but you're seeing another kind of like this microcosm, which I would describe as kind of like wokeness in this really kind of small little thing.
Because I kind of like stopped being in the gender critical circles as much, or like the turf circles, because I got like canceled
Oh, you did?
months ago, like for like a retard meme. A
Wait,
bunch of
what?
I got canceled a couple months ago by the like TERFs, or the gender critical feminists, for like a retard meme.
Like the meme wasn't retarded, but it was
No, it
about
like had the word retard. And
okay,
like
and
it was mostly like the people from the UK. They were upset at me. I don't know. I like ignored it. I didn't even care.
oh, okay,
But
interesting, okay.
um and so and I after that I progressively began to notice like a lot more like purity spirals, like or like policing, like internal group policing. Like there was like a lot of, if you don't have the right, if you don't have exactly this set of politics, you can't call yourself a TERF, like, or you can't call yourself a GC. You're just like a conservative LARPing as a TERF, or
Yeah. Yeah.
was or they. I've seen people like throw the book, Andrea Dworkin's book, Right Wing Women at people. um, but yeah, I don't like Marxism. I don't like anything like that lends itself to Marxism, or
Hmm.
an exclusively a very collectivist externalizing outlook. And that's what a lot of feminism does. So I identify as a feminist insofar as feminism means like advocating for women, but I don't. I that's like nobody else would consider my sets of beliefs likely feminist, so I don't really fit into that
Yeah.
camp, like ideologically.
Do you
People
think
call me gender critical.
okay, you're gender critical, but is there something inherent from your point of view, inherent in advocating for a group that lends itself to identity politics, which then lends itself to Marxism? Is that just inevitable?
I don't think so. I think advocating for issues for a group is not necessarily lending itself to identity politics in and of
Okay.
itself. When you frame it as oppressor oppressed is when you're lending yourself, because then you're automatically creating like a zero sum dynamic where like if you are going like if you are going to gain something, it almost signals that another group is going to lose something. And they always say, and then they follow this up with like equality feels like oppression when you've been like privileged or whatever. But like
Yeah.
that's not okay. That's not
You don't buy into
actually
that.
what happens.
Okay. You don't buy into that zero sum dynamic.
No, because it's dialectical. I mean, it's literally it's in creating intentional conflict between different like racial groups, like national groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, sexes. Like you can see this play out too with like a lot of like the red pill and then like the feminism. There's this weird like constant like dialectical conflict where you have both these parties like perpetuating this idea that sex relations are zero sum. And that's almost exclusively what the red pill like stuff is. It's like they view, if a woman is getting or is like incurring any benefit in a relationship, that means you are necessarily losing something as the other party. And that's that dialectical conflict that just keeps iterating and like creating these weird like niches on the internet. Like Pearl's a great example because she's saying like men don't get married, and that like men don't get married because women benefit from marriage, as if the fact women benefit in any capacity means men inherently cannot benefit. And so that kind of, it's like weirdly, it sounds like superficially conservative or right leaning, but it's what she's advocating for is actually very leftist. If you peel it back, so it's like it's all of this like dialectical conflict. It's going in one direction. It's going left.
Okay, and what is left then, and
Basically,
why is the
towards I say left, but like more toward like collectivism and away from more traditional, like I guess Judeo-Christian like values more. But so which is what's happening. Like when you have a breakdown of like when you have a breakdown in the family, you have a breakdown in the more local community, like localism. And so Robert Nisbet talks about his this book. I can't remember the title. It's Community, but it's by Robert Nisbet. He basically says that when that smaller local structure breaks down, that leaves everyone deferring to a larger authority for their moral authority. And so now that we've kind of had a breakdown in the smaller community, we've had a break, like people aren't really religious anymore. There's no that religiosity that binds together community. People are deferring to popular culture and the government for their moral authority. They're getting their values from TikTok, what's popular on TikTok. They're getting their values from the government.
Trending. Yeah.
They're from their school teachers, and not like the grandparents or
experts
or people grandparents, their people or their grandparents are friends with, or like elders in the community, or like elders of the church, etc.
I like where we're going with this, but I have to interrupt you in building this argument because you are an agnostic atheist. So it sounds like you're admitting that society itself is going to shift leftward if it doesn't have the glue of religiosity. So how do agnostic atheists humble themselves in a way to lend themselves to the opposite of the breakdown of society?
Because I know with the whole new atheist thing, I don't think agnosticism has to be inherently like opposed to religion. That's like a false like dialectical conflict.
Okay.
Just because you don't need to be in opposition to religion just because you don't like believe in like an actual higher being, or you don't know that there is an actual higher being. But a lot of the new atheism became like a proselytizing religion. It became denigrating of any type of like transcendent belief system. And then that kind of like almost like translated to any type of religion or expression of spiritual belief becoming uncool. And that weirdly morphed into paganism being very popular.
Paganism?
Yeah, that's
like in what respect? Like aesthetically, or like
Wiccan, like Gen Z. It's like the fastest growing religion among Gen Z. It's very odd.
Well, it lends itself to, I guess, you are the generator of your own. Your will is the generator of your own spirituality, which lends itself to the internet influencer kind of mindsets. Like I manifest my own powers through
the
like
new
projecting
age paganism. I can like if I can will something into existence.
Yeah.
But I know there's an article going around a couple of weeks ago about they're adding this like pagan witch program to like the University of Edinburgh. I probably said that wrong. Edinburgh. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah, Edinburgh.
And if you go on TikTok, like the like pagan or like witchcraft thing on like the hashtag, there's like tons of creators like making videos about like how to set up your altar or like this set of post. I don't know, like I don't know what they do, but
it's interesting. So the Christians that were worried about Harry Potter were worried for the right reasons, because now like everybody thinks they're a magician.
Well, I actually don't think that is Harry Potter necessarily as a result of that. I think part of it is Marxism, because of anti-capitalism, because what they are saying is with this pagan bend, they're saying that basically pagan or like witchcraft, and they're specifically targeting like young Gen Z females. They're saying like the earth or like nature is associated with the feminine, and so capitalism and like consumerism inherently alienates you from the feminine, and so you can kind of get some of that back by being a witch.
By buying all these witchy products.
Yeah.
Huh.
But that serves two purposes, right? It kind of creates this immediate like dialectical opposition between like Judeo-Christianity and like witchcraft, because there's always been that kind of like ideological tension. And then on the other front, it creates like an inherent like anti-capitalist leaning.
Yeah.
Anti-capitalist, but capitalist. I don't. I say capitalist, but that's technically pejorative.
You're bringing up a lot of things. So I apologize to the audience for jumping around. So this, how does one, well, we have to finish with the religion thing. So if you're seeing that in the absence of religion, religion's going to return over and over and over again, like what, from your point of view, how do you push culture towards the religion? If religion is going to happen anyway, and maybe it's not, how do you participate in pushing the culture towards the religion that you would favor, even if you don't believe in the transcendental purposes, you still believe in the what you call the Judeo-Christian values? Or are you responsible at all for that? You just say, well, this is just the system that I live in.
I'm a little bit black pilled on that front, because there's the decline of religiosity, like just from what I've read and I've seen, started like around the Industrial Revolution. Because then that was the breakdown of like the house of the economic unit, and then where all your larger extended family were in the same dwelling. So, and Robert Nisbet says like, or says something similar, and he wrote that book Community in like 1951, 1952.
Oh, wow.
So that he spotted the community problem back in the 50s, which is what people point to as like the quintessential like time or like era of the nuclear family. Well, the problem was with the nuclear family. The nuclear family was a problem because it was like a weird superficial like synthesis, like modern synthesis of a family. Pre-industrial revolution, people lived in with their larger extended family.
Yeah. And it was broken down into a smaller unit, like man, woman, two children, then a dog kind of thing. And that is just like the image that was given. I'm sure like reality was different than that, but that image was superseded by variations and then further breaking down. Have you seen in your cohort, in your generation, like a lot of broken homes, a lot of kids with variations on the family? And have you seen the outcome of that? Do you ever wonder about like what?
I know the statistics.
Okay, is it observable to you? Like sorry to use this word, vibe? Like people's relationship to family, people's relationship to monogamy?
Yes, like you typically, I mean, people from like broken homes or like single parent households tend to be a little more rough around the edges. They tend to like have like, I guess like lower ambitions, if one way to put it, almost like, because that, I guess the behavior hasn't been modeled. Like it's modeled in a way at school, but like there's no like consistent parental modeling of, hey, like you shouldn't necessarily always just be like comfortable. Like maybe you should try and like push yourself a little bit, like be more long-term, like goal oriented.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. So you witness, or like you have a problem with Marxism. You have a problem with this thing that you call the dialectic or dialectical thinking, which has something to do with zero sum. What is the alternative to that dialectic, us versus them, like that back and forth?
I'm referring to the Hegelian dialectic when well, the alternative is, so the problem is when you're framing everything as a fault of the structure, is typically what the ultimate conclusion is. Like the fault of everyone's problems, everyone's grievances can be reduced to, okay, it's because of your identity, and it's because of your identity in relation to the state or the superstructure. And so therefore all solutions are governmentally oriented. So if the problem is necessarily the structure, then the solution is necessarily like top-down intervention on the structure.
Yeah.
And so first the problem is like identifying things as necessarily caused by identity relation, because then that inherently lends itself to like, okay, well, everyone with this collective or the same identity is somehow being like oppressed in the same way.
Yeah.
What else could do that but a superstructure?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's kind of like how that has been framed, at least since it's at least partly the fault of the social gospel and like post-millennialism. I don't know if you're familiar, but
Can
that's a
you
whole
give
thing.
a little footnote on that? Social gospel and millennialism?
Yeah, post-millennialism and social gospel.
Yeah.
Sorry, wait. Sorry, what'd you
Would you
say?
give me a little
Yeah, yeah,
footnote
yeah.
on
So
that?
basically, social gospel was it was really popular in the early 20th century, and it as opposed to premillennialism, which emphasized a more like fire and brimstone, like apocalyptic type second coming of Jesus. Postmillennialism was basically in order for Jesus to come back, we have to improve the earth. We have to get it as close to perfection as possible.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I can't remember, but he was like one of the preeminent, I guess, not founders, but
Influencers of.
theologians in this area.
Okay.
And he was highly influential on Martin Luther King, a lot of the social Christians. He was a socialist. He was for like a
Yeah.
redistrict.
The perfection of the world through
Yeah.
intentional, structural, systematic implementation. This is like, this
Mhm.
is
Yeah,
foundation of
because
the
they think this
UN,
is
the WEF, like anybody who's a globalist, like they're
Mhm.
all like descendant of this way of thinking.
Well,
Like we can perfect the
I
world.
wouldn't say all of them. But I see this social gospel was a product of German idealism. So Hegel, Kant, like in those like that kind of like they were reactions to the Enlightenment. Those type of thinkers, and they all influence this new strain of idealism, especially in Protestantism, American Protestantism. And so with the social gospel, they came to the conclusion that instead of like helping the community from like a lateral perspective, like distributing like food and aid, Christians need to be the social, cultural, and political change. So it's Christians' obligation to like change society to be more like more godly from the
You
top
know,
down. And so
you
that's
know, people who are like really worried about Christian nationalism, like the people in the government specifically and in the media that catastrophize over Christian nationalism. They are the Christian nationalists. They just don't recognize themselves as Christian. Wokeness is Christian nationalism. This is the
they're a product of German
descendant
idealism. Yeah,
it's Protestantism, German idealism. It's just called social justice. It's just you take the God out, but it's the same. It's the same organ.
It's the same orientation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I derailed you though. So you were describing you're describing these two influences and the dialectic, and I ultimately I'm like, well, what's the opposition to that, or no, you can't even do an opposition to the dialectic because then you're it's like a tar baby. Now I'm in dialectic with the dialectic. So what's the alternative to the
negation? Yeah,
you're negating the negation. So okay, I'm sorry. So you're studying all this stuff because you're recognizing that something's wrong, something's off about this way of thinking. And it tends towards collectivism, and it tends towards a top-down state solution. It tends towards, we have to have an intervention on the state. And there's something about your values that, or just like your being, that is kind of sketched out about that. So investigating it is one thing, but what is the positive alternative to that from your point of view?
I don't like being told what to do. It basically comes down, I don't like being told what to do. Like, I don't like people like preaching to me. I don't like people like moralizing to me. Like, because a lot of times, like, if someone is like telling you need to or give more to charity, or you need to do something in a certain way, that's a telltale sign that they're they want to basically become your master. They're telling you you should do these things because they want to control you. Like they're prescribing their will onto you. And so if you centralize that and like increase the leverage, increase the ability to do that from the federal government, from the state government, et cetera, then like you're going to have like fewer and fewer and fewer actual like options. Like you're not going to have as much latitude to like do what you want. And so that's kind of like I don't like totalitarianism. I don't like authoritarianism. I like free market capitalism. I like being able to decide for myself like what I want to believe and what I want to do.
Yeah. And if everybody around you is increasingly thinking in the same way, like how's that made you feel to watch like this leftward shift, this shift towards top-down state solution and moralism?
That's part of the reason why I agitate. I like to like make people uncomfortable because I almost see that as a way to move the Overton. Like if you're like desensitizing people, if you're making them uncomfortable, then like they will get more used to being uncomfortable.
Okay.
That's part of the problem is people are not used to public discomfort in any capacity.
Well, but that's not true because you're probably not the only female on that dorm floor that was uncomfortable with the male.
Maybe not, but I was the only one uncomfortable enough to do visible retaliation, like in a way that I could. Most like.
But isn't he participating in the same thing, broadly speaking, of making other people uncomfortable? Like he's making them up to the gender roles or whatever.
I never heard anybody else complain about it. It
Okay.
was really only me that like would like crack jokes about it and like kind of like raise like, oh, like, did you see that or something? Nobody else really cared. I thought that was kind of weird. But I think partly because of social media, we almost sanitize like public interactions. And so like we think every interaction we have in public, it should be as docile and polite and like
uncancelable. Yeah,
as possible. Like you should not show like public discomfort with any type of behavior, because we have to be accepting and open, and we can't shame people for things.
Yeah. But then on the opposite side, the people who do shame are still gonna be the moral authorities. So you have a bunch of docile people that are kind of being shepherded along because they don't want to infringe upon the moralists. So they are being controlled by just like going along with things. So you're willing to pop your head up and question authority, question moralism, make people uncomfortable, wake them up, say, what do you think about this? And use memery to do that.
Yeah. I also do that by like in class, I'll ask uncomfortable, like I won't push back very hard, but I'll push back enough to where it's obvious that I'm pushing back because nobody else does. And a lot of times it'll be like minor ways, like for example, in my cognitive science and the law class, they were talking about how black people are more likely to get schizophrenia. And she said it was because that there was like less access to healthcare, less access to like mental health screening. I was like, under the age of 25, marijuana is highly correlated with like, or increasing your risk of schizophrenia. And she was like, oh, like, I don't think that's true. And I'm like, it's true. And she asked me to send her the studies after the class, and I sent them to her. But like it'll be stuff like that where I'm like that's blatantly not correct. You're making that up.
Yeah, yeah. And so in that instance, it's I guess it's a version of the social justice thing. Her interpretation of the data was about the system. It's like the system's the problem. It's not the health or the habits of the individuals or the individuals within that group of people who are making these choices for whatever reason, because we can't criticize those.
We can't.
What do you mean by that? Everything is externalized.
Basically, like any type of happening, any type of like
Consequence.
or any probabilistic increase in the likelihood of a consequence or like a disfavorable outcome is moved outside of the agent, like the agency of the person.
Yeah.
So that person is not responsible for their increased risk of schizophrenia because they are doing drugs. It's the system's fault for making that person want to smoke weed, or it's the system's fault for not educating that person that doing drugs is bad, or
Yeah.
it's never like the individual is never forced to internalize the like
Mm.
the blame for the outcomes of any of their actions. It's
Yeah.
always push outward.
I, the state is what the state is. I don't see it going away. Once it gets, it's got all these laws, it's got all these patterns, and it's going to keep on repeating the pattern over and over and over again. Like, so it's going to be constantly pushing for the ideology that increases its power, that locates the agency inside of the state.
Because German ideal, like Hegel, that's because of how we think of the state. Hegel literally envisioned the German government, the German state as God. He saw like the final, like the representation of the state as the divine or the transcendent being. And that's kind of like we see this why like elections kind of like feel like life or death. Partly is because we've allowed like the government to balloon to the point where it actually is almost like a godlike figure. Like one person like becoming like president of the United States can drastically change your life in one way or the other. And that's because the state is transformed into this almost like omnipotent like being, which is just like a cluster of beings that have the ability to like run your life in one way or the other, run the economy, etc.
Yeah. So is one way to opt out of thinking it? I guess what you're advocating for is just to think about it differently, or to not allow yourself to think about it as God, even though it is kind of the most powerful thing in the world right now, the global American empire, or at least the collection of entities that is beholden
I think
to.
it is internalized more, like because a lot of like what has been infiltrating the culture like teaches people like because by virtue of your identity group, by virtue of your socioeconomic class, by virtue of your gender or transgender status or sex, you are just going to like go where the structural like where whatever the direction the structure pushes you in by virtue of your like intersecting oppressions. And so the problem is people believe that. And so everything they do, they externalize every failure while also internalizing every success, right? If something good happens to you, it's because you're like great and wonderful. But if something bad happens to you, every bad thing that happens to you is pushed externally. Is never your fault. Nothing's your fault. It's the structure's fault. It's like your parents' fault. In the case of a lot of the queer theory stuff, we see like, oh, you're feeling alienated and isolated and suicidal because your parents aren't affirming your gender. Like that kind of like everything is pushed outside of the self. And so that creates a feeling of helplessness. And if I feel like I have no like agency, if I feel like I have no like autonomy, like if I have no ability to affect my life in any way, then I'm going to want a stronger God. I'm going to want a stronger state because because if I feel like my life is just happening to me, then I'm going to want someone like above me that's strong and can like control the way that I'm going to be moved.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't buy that.
No.
No. How is that? How do you think that your way of looking at things has affected and shaped your life and the decisions that you've made so far?
I think part of it was growing up in a military family. And so I think part of it is my dad did a lot of like risk taking behavior with us as a kid. I did a lot of risk taking behavior in high school. And I think part of that could like developmentally and dispositionally, that could be part of it because now like you see like this weird like bubble wrap, like hover parenting where
Yeah.
physical risk, like avoid physical risk at all cost, but like they're exposing kids to like insane things at very young ages. So it's basically the opposite of like how I grew up. I was like very like sheltered off the internet until like high school, and but I was allowed to do like I was allowed to do like take physical risks. And from what I
Like
saw my
what? Like
friends,
paragliding or rock
um,
climbing or
we like yeah jumping off of rocks. I rode horses, four-wheelers, just stuff like that.
Okay, yeah.
But and it's I've noticed like with just the people I grew up around, it's been like the opposite where people are their parents let them do more on the internet, but they were also like paranoid about like them doing risky things like physically. And so
Yeah.
I think that affects like disposition. Like if you go through life like paranoid about like I guess physical harm, while also I guess like almost like frying your endocrine system with like not only like no exercise, bad food, and also like being exposed to these algorithms that like prey on like our dopamine signaling system,
Yeah.
you're going to have a weird development or weird disposition,
Yeah.
where you're going to almost like seek safety, but
And stimulus.
and stimulus.
Extreme
So, like
stimulus, but
the risk taking will be in like bizarre. Like I'm wondering if like the risk taking is manifests itself in like weird sexual behavior or weird like forms of expression in order like
mm,
instead of like feeling like agentic through taking a risk. I feel agentic through self differentiation. Like I have to be this gender.
mm,
I have to be like overtly like sexual in this manner. I have to be pansexual or a demi boy, genderqueer, or like
yeah.
um one, one of those.
So briefly, and you can dodge this question, but growing up female and then being thrust into this gender world, like, were you conscious of your womanhood or your femininity as a concept distinct from you or a social concept, and then watching it like become such a strong factor in the socialization of your generation once you do plug on in online, once you do get to college, once you do kind of break out of home into this new world, like was that kind of something you had to wrap your head around, like what a woman is or like what a woman means now as opposed to what you are?
Like that's not something I really ever like. I didn't spend a lot of time like because I didn't spend a lot of time like evaluating my behaviors, my own I like
Femininity or
that
masculinity,
wasn't
and
something
you
I wasn't
didn't.
like dissecting why I like things or I just did things. And that's
Yeah.
probably because I like wasn't on social media until I was like 14.
Yeah.
And so that allowed, I guess, more, I guess maybe like I'm assuming that social media is causing a lot of like anxiety or anxiety like symptoms. And so
Yeah,
that's
because you weren't really concerned with yourself. You're concerned more with the world. And because
mm,
your experience of growing up was more about being out in the world, doing these things and like, and then testing yourself against different things or mastering
mm,
different things rather than social media would be more like, what am I? Who am I? Like, am I this thing? And so it kind of makes you
yeah. Or
develop in that way.
how do like where there's all this like you can see people's profile, you see like talented people, beautiful people from like
Mm,
all over the world, and so now you automatically feel this need to like, oh, I see
compete.
people the only people who I see getting attention or like who I see getting praise are people who are really good at something or they can differentiate themselves in X way. And so that kind of like creates, I need to be, I need to be different than everybody else in some way in order for my life to have any type of value. And so that's why I think you see like all these, also this like the superimposition of all these like weird identities. So you see people in their like bios, they put all their mental illnesses, um, and they put their pronouns and they put their race because like that's the social currency. The more like intersections like you can cross off, the more unique you are, and therefore the more valuable your voice or you are. And so it's part of that. I think we can encounter more people on one day on the internet than somebody 100 years ago might in like years of their life. And so that kind of like, that's not natural to our evolution. And so that I'm sure that affects us psychologically and makes us like feel we have to do something outrageous or do something like differentiating to overcompensate for that exposure.
So when you end up on the internet, it's just a different thing to you. Like, how did you encounter it? And you said already you were doing right-wing-ish trolling already, so you already knew that it was something. Sounds like you just use it. What is it to you, and how do you use it? What is its use and its balance?
I use it for like, it's mostly ideas. Like I I've learned a lot about like some of using Twitter. I've learned a lot like of new things that I've never heard of before, especially with respect to like philosophy, like political science, like even like I listened to Jordan Peterson for like years. Like, so I learned about Jordan Peterson on Reddit. And I learned about James Lindsay on Reddit. And I've been listening to James Lindsay for a couple of years now. But
yeah, he said he met you. You liked it.
Yeah.
I just saw him. He passed it. Yeah, maybe he thought you were somebody else then.
Maybe.
Because we were just talking. Well, we just talk about a non-people. It's like, oh yeah, this person. So maybe not.
We messaged back and forth, but we haven't met in person. I've been wanting to go like see him talk, but I don't know when I'll be.
He's a good guy. He's a great man. He's a shit stirrer and he can be kind of a prick on the internet, but I love him personally. But anyway, so you meet and you connect, but then what do you find your voice being? You wrote a wonderful thread. I'll link it in the description, where you took down this feminist Marxist or showed why feminist Marxism, or you just argued against it, and there was a back and forth. I basically
explained like how you cannot say that queer theory isn't like an ideological descendant of feminism. You can't say that. It is. So
this is an important point. And certain feminists, this makes them very uncomfortable, and it's not fair to them because now they're the victimized of the child. But how is it the case that a certain strain of feminism queered itself into queer theory and then became that which is now destroying feminism?
Queer theory came out of sex positive feminism. So a lot of the like radical feminists you see like saying queer theory did not come out of their feminism. It's because they're sex negative feminists. So like those two branches like broke off in like the 70s. So that's why they say that's not us. Like that didn't come from feminism. It's because it didn't come from their feminism, but it comes from that same like that like idealist tradition. Like you can trace it all the way back. Like it goes like through like Beauvoir, like all the way back to Hegel. Like Simone de Beauvoir, she said, one is not born woman, one becomes a woman. And depending on your philosophical tradition or like your feminist tradition, you're going to interpret that differently. But people undoubtedly interpret it to mean that like you become woman, as in woman is a social construct that is imposed upon you by external factors.
Is it the case that sex negative, and could you define sex negative in relation to sex positive, but are sex negative feminists, so-called, are they took the ideological pathway and then they stopped at a certain point and then it kept on moving? Like it kept on going.
So I would say like when people talk about sex negative feminism, they're often talking about like of like a tradition that's like followed from people like Andrea Dworkin, who wrote Right Wing Women. She wrote a bunch of other novels, Mercy, but a lot of her activism centered around being anti-prostitution and anti-pornography. So that's like what people refer to when they say sex negative.
Okay.
Anti-prostitution, anti-pornography. They say that like a lot of like basically a lot of like modern conventions with regards to sexual expression and sexuality do not actually benefit women. And sex positive feminists say like because um, that turned into like queer theory, but because like there's parts of womanhood are constructed and imposed, we don't actually like tabula rasa, uh, blank slateism, um, different ideas we have about men or women are not necessarily a function of biological difference. They're not necessarily innate. And so we don't know what's actually imposed upon men or women. And therefore, we're going to just assume every differential is a construct. It's like what they do with all other like critical theories. Any discrepancy is like any difference is evidence of like oppression, not that they completely ignore confounders. Confounders aren't a thing.
What's a
Because
confounder? Sorry.
like confound like other potential
Okay.
causes that have been like totally ignored. They pick the cause they like and they run with it,
Okay.
because that fits within their inductive reasoners. They have an overarching theory and then they interpret the evidence oriented towards that theory.
Yeah.
And it's reliable. They do that every single field of critical theory and in every single like strain of postmodernism.
Hmm.
But and so that's kind of like how sex positive feminism, like the tradition sex positive feminism came out of, was you have this idea that women don't like sex, or like men like sex more than women. That's a social construct, and that construct is specifically imposed upon women to oppress women. And so therefore we have to be sex positive. We have to be like, we want to flip that on its head and use sex to empower women, because it's basically, it's that dialectic, right? It's turning like, it's pitting this like males use sex to oppress women in order to like get that mutual recognition, or in order to get self-consciousness, as Hegel calls it in the dialectic. You have to basically almost like take that dynamic and like flip it, like create an inversion. And so they do that by women like making money from sex work or OnlyFans or whatever is actually empowering, because you're taking that like oppressive construct and you're using it to benefit you. And so that's kind of like how like the strand like sex positive feminism took, along with queer theory. Queer theory came out of sex positive feminism.
And that's why you have swerfs and turfs kind of lumped together as a
Yeah.
negative pejorative. And
They're
swerf
both
is a
sex negative.
sex worker exclusionary radical feminist, and then the trans exclusionary radical feminists. And those are the sex negative so-called feminists.
Yes.
And there's a kind of slight well, it's the dialectical trick that sex positive, sex negative flattens it, because there are aspects of descendants of sex negative feminists who aren't sex negative. They're just thinking in terms of like sex is something that's not, shouldn't
They're
be.
still thinking in that the sex negative feminists, they're still thinking in that like oppressor oppressed binary, but they're just doing it in a different way.
Yeah.
So it's still like dialectical, because they still believe in a patriarchy and like an overall superstructure that is designed to oppress women for the benefit of men.
Yeah.
It's just they just believe it manifests in a different way.
That it's so I got in the middle of a dust storm, and I hosted a live stream with two women, and so that they could hash something out, and I just ended up being quiet. And then somebody did like a Twitter space
Stella
for like a
and
3 hour,
KKK.
yeah, for between Stella O'Malley and Kelly J. Keene, who are two powerhouses that are affecting some great work, but they had some dust up, and like they aired some sort of tension, they resolved it, and they trusted me to host that. And in the moment, I just saw that it was necessary for me to just be the observer. And then somebody did a stream on about that, and a bunch of people started to co-ruminate about this thing, and why was Benjamin quiet? Like, he was probably told to be quiet so that Stella could do, and they started like imagining all this dirt around it, because they had an inductive process, like where they knew that Stella's the bad guy, and like, so I'm enabling her, blah, 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 blah. But I got this clip from this, and I didn't listen to the whole thing. Somebody sent me a clip. Like, this was pretty crazy. They really went after you. So everybody like kind of came out with their grievances about me. And this woman, Kara Dansky, who's doing really good work in the, women's rights space, like trying to carve out a space for women to be, protected specifically in prisons and sports and stuff like that, like on a legal level. She did this really weird, there was just this really weird thing that happened where we had a debate. Well, we had an interview a couple years ago, and it was about like how, if feminism is about liberating women from the patriarchy, what does that actually mean? And so in that debate, are you still there? You're breaking up. I don't want to lose you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. In that debate, I asked her to define how is it that women are liberated from patriarchy? What does that mean in practice? And she said, well, one aspect of that is men need to stop raping women. Like that was her statement. So men need to stop raping women. I'm like, well, okay, so how do we stop men from raping women? And she's like, well, you men need to stop raping women. And we got really hung up on this thing. And we went into all these different variations of how men's behavior is oppressing women, and men need to change that behavior. I'm like, well, is this the problem of evil? Do we need to have like little chips inside of men and women so that if the heart rate of a man is at a certain level, then the chip can just shock the man, and that's how we'll stop men from raping women? And she's like, why are you thinking this term? Men just need to stop raping women. And I'm like, well, I haven't raped women in 46 years. I haven't raped a single woman. Like, I don't know how to stop from raping women because I haven't done it yet. Anyway, so I told a story about. She told a story about like being harassed on the street. And, somebody pulled up to her. She was a young, vulnerable woman, and they yelled at her, or they propositioned her. And that really terrified her, or traumatized her. And, and I'm like, and I tried to get into like, how do you interpret that stimulus and she interpreted it as the patriarchy. Like, she interpreted everything as this like superstructure imposing oppression on women, every single turn. And I'm getting to the point of my story. It's just fascinating because then I apparently told her a story about how I was driving around LA and I saw a beautiful woman, and I found myself wanting to wave at beautiful women, and I suppressed that. Like, I just said, like, as a man, like, I just want to wave at a pretty woman. I see a pretty woman, and I waved at her. And so anyways, in this space a couple days ago, apparently she repeats that story about how uncomfortable that made her, that I had this sexual compulsion, that I refused myself because it was socially unacceptable. And she made this really big insinuation that I'm basically a sexual predator because I want to wave at a pretty woman. And it's so ridiculous, but it follows from that sex negative. It follows.
Yeah.
Like, it actually makes sense to her to interpret me as a sexual predator or sexual deviant. Because like,
you grew up under the influence of the patriarchy, therefore you view sex as a tool, or any type of sexual imposition as a tool of controlling women or like imposing your will upon women. And so every interaction a man has with a woman under patriarchy is inherently like influenced by these power dynamics.
Yeah.
And so nothing can be analyzed in isolation of the superstructure.
So it's not about like an aesthetic appreciation. It's not about like a friendly. There's no such thing as friendship between men and women. It's all power. They
are obsessed. They're obsessed with power and dominance. That's every single critical theorist in general. Every single interaction, everything they absorb from anything is filtered through that oppressor-oppressed lens. Everything. Okay.
And so in the case of sex negative feminism, all sexual signals from males is a power dynamic. So when we get into the Phil Illy thing, I'm sorry to
how extreme. It depends on how extremist they are, but generally, yeah.
But and I'm sorry to my audience for bringing this up because it's just such a novel little function. There was a picture of a man in a dress at a conference on this mountain, and a lot of women who weren't there got really, really upset about this picture of a man in a dress on a mountain. And we had a lot of conversations about this, but they kept on going down and saying that this is him imposing his fetish on everybody else. It's a power, it's a domination tactic on behalf of him. And there's no other way. And maybe that could be the case, but there was no other interpretation of that.
Yep.
Like everything that a man does, every sexual impulse that a man has is by definition rape.
Necessarily a sexual imposition or like an act of sexual domination over any woman in its proximity.
Yeah. And a woman doesn't have any ability to interpret that stimulus as anything other than being oppressed. Like you can't just like shrug it off because that's internalizing misogyny, right?
You can't, well, those women who do not analyze the world in that manner are described as doing so, as they're analyzing the world in a lack of oppressor-oppressed binary because they are proximal to men in a way that like they are trying to get favor from those men.
That's why they use pick-me. So any woman who disagrees with that interpretation are called pick-me's because they are, and pick-me means that they are siding with men because they're getting
a benefit for doing that. They're not actually doing that because they believe it. And this is all covered in Andrew Dworkin's book, Right-Wing Women. Basically, like women on the right, women aren't feminists, right-wing women. They're right-wing women because they're getting a benefit or they're like basically appropriating the power of the men that they're around by being right-wing. So they choose that route instead of being like a left-wing feminist because they're benefiting from the patriarchy by being right-wing and proximal to men.
Okay. And which makes them, and you're explaining a dynamic in this gender critical movement that there's nobody more sexist to women than these women who believe in this way. And then when they see a woman who doesn't think the same way, they always talk about themselves as representing all women. Like women think this, all women think this. And the women who don't think this,
as a collective, everything is collectivized.
It's all collectivized. And so they completely dehumanize the women. And they don't think that those women have come to another way of looking at things through reasoning.
Yep. There's if you have a divergent viewpoint, it is always about power. Everything they do not. Nothing can be interpreted without a lens of like, how is this person getting more power from this interaction, or how is the power dynamic affecting this interaction? So therefore, like if you have a divergent view as a woman, it's not because you've like rationalized your way to that divergent view. It's because you're getting some type of benefit from that divergent view. Like you're getting more power, you're getting like
influence, status.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I've known all this stuff.
That's the critical theory. You see that like with Candace Owens, like Uncle Tom. That's the same dynamic. That's the identical dynamic with Candace Owens. It's identical. It's so different.
Okay. All right. Because it goes to ridiculous ends when I'm accused of being a sexual predator for describing my desire to smile and make a woman smile. Like that's totally ridiculous, but it does follow from the propositions. It all works out. Like this is just the manifestation of all these different propositions. Now, what we diverge from and what we want to get back to is that now the gender critical feminists are up against their mortal enemy, which is patriarchy in drag now.
AGPs.
The AGPs, the queer theorists, but the queer theorists are using the same dynamic that they used against them. And a lot of women are on that train too, which baffles the TERFs because they're like, wait, why are you operating against your own power? And then the females who are agitating against the TERFs, you see this in the photos. There's a lot of boys there, but there's a lot of women. They're saying the TERFs are trying to impose the patriarchy. So like like how do you square that? And I know they won't want to see this, because it's their baby, or like it follows from the same priors.
It's just the same dynamic. Like it's just the same dynamic with interchangeable variables, right?
Okay.
Patriarch, men are the oppressors, women are the oppressed. Trans identified males are the oppressors, women are the oppressed, and then women who are adjacent trans identified males are only adjacent trans identified males because they're getting some type of benefit from advocating for trans identified males.
Yeah.
And then the queer on the other side say, oh, these TERFs are only TERFs because they're getting some type of power benefit from being TERFs.
From being sex realist. Yeah. The TERFs are getting benefits through the sex category, but the gender category is something, and then keeping those benefits from the people who are transgender.
Yeah, that's what. So the transgender people view the cis people as in the position of power.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of the TERFs represent is like the bigoted cis people who are trying to basically limit expressivity or like eradicate trans people or genocide trans people, which means you like aren't allowed to use women's restrooms, and that literally means that's eradicating transness. And so if you eradicate transness, you genociding trans, not because you're actually killing a trans person, but because you're eliminating their ability to express their transness, and so they're trans in a diminished capacity. And so that means you've eradicated or genocided transness.
Yeah.
But they say that like TERFs are advocating against that because they're getting some sort of like a proximal benefit, either from they're getting an indirect benefit from the patriarchy or their role in the patriarchy,
which they agitated for by imposing all these Title IX laws and all these other laws by having the patriarchy assume that their rights as a sex. They're benefiting from the patriarchy by agitating against the patriarchy, and so they're part of the patriarchy now, even though they're against it. They want to smash the patriarchy, but
because the queer anyone who is wanting the system to stay the same is not a revolutionary. If you're not a revolutionary, therefore you're an enemy. Because TERFs want to kind of keep the system as it was, at least in that respect. Yeah. They're counter-revolutionaries. Like they're frustrating the revolution.
Yeah. So you see all this and you can describe it, but what's your position then? You watch all this. I guess what do you do? Like I'm
a classical liberal, so I'm gender critical. But a lot of what I post is like describing what's happening or describing the dynamic. Or I post different research papers. I post I do research dumps where I post all of the the research on puberty blockers, bone growth, osteoporosis, long-term effects on brain development, on detransition rates, insurance data, all that stuff.
Yeah. So there's a way to move the culture away from the mistake that it's making, specifically with the medicalization of children, without engaging in this power dynamic.
I think so, but there's not a lot of. So the problem is a lot of people who, especially specifically women, because I experienced this kind of dynamic where it's you're going on social media because you're not allowed to talk about these things in public. And because it's not okay to talk about these things in public, you find these niches on social media. And the most visible niche are the radical feminists, because they've been doing this the longest. And so you kind of what a lot of people do is that they see this. They aren't necessarily radical feminists when they find these groups, but they find this sense of belonging in this group because they've been so socially ostracized and isolated in every other avenue. And so they kind of almost uncritically adopt this new belief system because this group aligns with what they feel is going. This group is identifying a problem with what they also feel is going wrong. Yeah. And so they kind of this is the number one most important issue to them if they normally found the TERFs. And so they're willing to kind of absorb like through osmosis, like the other ideological system to be accepted in that group and oriented towards that like form of activism.
Okay. Yeah. So unwittingly Marxified.
Yeah. I think like most people have been. Normally it's incremental and it's normally accidental. Like people, and a lot of these people, they don't even think they're Marxist. They think they're center left, like so, or some will even say that I'm a social democrat, but
Yeah.
they don't explicitly know this dynamic that they're almost like pushing or participating in is necessarily just like the idealist version of like what Marxism is, the base and the superstructure, like oppressed is
Yeah.
oppressed.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just the idealist version, whereas Marx is materialist. Like
Yeah.
the structures of oppression are constructions rather than like resources.
It's very interesting because I stumbled into this topic to describe the topic, and I was befriended by that group because, and then I interviewed that group, and then about, just I got into the door, and then I started experiencing cancellation, like where they dogpile on me or they cancel me, and then it just happened every 3 to 6 months. I'd say something or I'd be involved in something, and they go after me really, really hard.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different dynamics in that. But I think if you're not getting canceled by that group, then there's something probably Marxist about you.
Yeah, you're probably ideologically. I don't know how many times I've been struggled or canceled.
Yeah, you get struggled. That's just a part of the
because I
dynamic.
post edgy memes. I think they're funny. I think memes are effective. I've been accused of being a trans woman. I've been accused of being a man.
Yeah. Why? Why? Because you have a sense of humor?
You can't possibly like imagine that I guess a woman would be like edgy or
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's very self-limiting. It's very like it puts them in a box of victimization, and then it reinforces their weakness.
They don't view themselves as individuals. They view themselves as a part of a collective, and they view this collective very stringently. And so like they view themselves and others through this like very strict ideological lens, almost like just basic stereotypes. Like, so if you are not like X, X, and X and X, then you're not outside of my collective.
Yeah.
Because like if you're framing the world in like terms of or like if you're systematizing the world in this like way of X characteristics makes person safe, then anyone who does not display X characteristics, it's automatically unsafe in the unsafe box.
Yeah. It's interesting because that question that Matt Walsh posed, what is a woman? It's not strictly a biological category for a lot of the gender critical activists. A lot of or the most vocal activistic kind of gender critical think woman is an oppressed class. One is not born or biologically assembled as a woman, but the biological. So it's really interesting over the last few years where like they threw away that biological category, but then once they noticed that without that, then they don't have any claim to rights in the materialist level. Then they're like, oh yeah, okay, women are weak. Women aren't weak. Women are like more than the sum of their bodies. Women aren't just reproductive things. Da, 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 da. And so they put it away. And then like once the trans people started to invade their space, they went back to sex realism. But they have a really hard time with it because they kind of basically have to say, they have to keep some sort of blank slateism in order for their system to work. So they kind of basically say, they tend to believe, it seems like, that sex stops at the neck. Like there's no cognitive differences. There's no behavioral differences.
It's just motivated reasoning. Like the characteristics, it's convenience and motivated reasoning. And that's what they do. That's what all of the critical theorists do. Like, they don't actually have a set principle. Everything is like changeable. Everything is shiftable. So they don't have to keep a single working definition of X thing. They can change it whenever it's convenient to their activism. There's nothing stopping them. They're idealists. So like through a process of becoming, their world becomes what they manifest, what they imagine. And so if you change the language, you literally change reality, because they're like, a lot of feminism is highly influenced by deconstructionism, post-structuralism, like Foucault, Derrida, et cetera, all that fun stuff. So
Fun. So looking forward, I know you're super busy, and we'll get off. So kind of like closing questions, like what do you where do you see yourself headed in this in as a cultural critic or commentator, like in that kind in the internet world, like where do you think you're headed, or what kind of excites you, and what do you want to like produce in that? Are you thinking about becoming a writer in that direction once you have freer time?
I've been doing like this has mostly just been like a hobby. Like
Yeah.
uh I like making I like agitating. I like making people who I think are being dumb mad. Um and so I also like sharing information. I like reading. I like learning things.
Hmm.
So I'm not necessarily oriented towards like any like form of activism because I want to be a patent prosecutor and um which is partly why I think this is the first I've been invited on a couple. I think this is the first podcast or interview that I've done because I've been kind of worried about that kind of like public aspect and getting doxxed or getting in trouble or whatever. Because obviously I I share a lot of a lot of wrong things. Um, so I think maybe once I get a little more secure in my career, like a couple years in a
Hmm.
firm, then maybe I'll do maybe I'll dox myself, but it's
Yeah.
kind of like touch and go.
Yeah. Yeah. But do you have any like where you're headed intellectually in this level? Like what like where do you want to go? Like just to tell the audience like where do you want to head? Where are you gonna go? Like because we cover what you do. I like to ask like where are you going or what's developing? What do you see that's interesting? What's new out there?
I think a, a lot of it's speeding up. A lot of it's like it seems to be like an like increasing at an exponential pace. And the more people like put their thumb on the pulse, the more like desperate almost they get. And so
Hmm.
you see like a lot of like they're being more overt and they're less obfuscatory with like how they're running these programs. Save the ones from that students for fair admission versus Harvard. They've had to go back underground with some of those cases because they've
So
taken in the
you
PI
you
departments.
changed the conversation. You're speaking about a they.
They,
Yeah, you say
they
they
as
are
in
doing.
the activists, like the activists, like the true believers. Um, and so I think what I'm going like just doing or like looking at in the future is just continuing like to track and see what direction this is moving in because I like that's what I find kind of fun is like going through Google Scholar and like sorting by like looking at like social justice keywords, sorting by like most recent and seeing if I
Uh,
see anything new or like anything increasing in like frequency, which is how I noticed like the Wiccan stuff because there's a ton of like papers about the relationship with like paganism and capitalism. And so kind of just like tracking those like that tracking those like trends in academia. Um,
Fascinating. James is a little heavy-handed on the Gnosticism thing. He kind of like just groups things into Gnosticism and stuff, but I do think that it's a very, 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 very useful as long as you don't get swept up into a dialectic framework of like saying Gnosticism is the enemy, everything's Gnosticism. That's not my friend. But I can see what you're saying with paganism and this idealism. Like they kind of come in together. Like words are reality, intention and reality. Like it's a very idealist imposition, and then that leads to certain behaviors. That leads to collectivism because ultimately you run up against the fact that you can't change reality, but together we might change reality, or reality is social. So if we start to police our social reality, then we can actually affect our reality, which tends to make people live in these bubbles that then detach and then have like these really weird kind of
all
processes.
this, it looks like they're oriented potentially like in different directions, but they're all oriented towards revolution. that's the point. It's like they're all Marxism. Like, because like critical theories were even like discussed by the American or different like communist activists back in the 60s, 70s. Like the economic prosperity of the US was going to make it hard to actually like cause a revolution or create a revolution with vulgar Marxism. But you could on the basis of identity, if like especially with race, which is kind of like what sprung out of the civil rights movement with the Weather of the Ground, Black Panthers, and that kind of like academics that came out of that tradition kind of became what would become critical race theory, intersectionality theory. Angela Davis, Kimberly Crenshaw, Derek Bell, and all of them were drawing on W.E.B. Du Bois, who was influencing Frantz Fanon, Sartre. But basically, it's all connected. But they're all revolutionaries, which is why the counter-revolutionaries or the conservatives are the enemy, because anyone who wants to keep the system as it is the enemy to a revolutionary.
Well, yeah, it's and the problem with the revolutionaries is that they see that. Well, like one of my basic disagreements is like, okay, the system's flawed, but the system enables me to create something new, and they're channeling all of their creative energy into destroying something or reifying something and getting stuck in this thing. Well, I guess going back to your values, like you just don't want people to tell you what to do. And so these revolutionaries, like they want to stop people from being told what to do by telling everybody what to do. So rather than just doing their own thing, like, and seeing what works and like saying, I have an idea. So there is a process in my life where I am an idealist when I think of an idea, and then I try to materialize it. And then I have to wrestle with the bounds of if the idea works in practice or not. But I need to do that on my own, take responsibility and learn from my mistakes. And so I need people not controlling me for me to be an inventor. I guess that might go into patent law. In order to find new things, you have to be free from all this social justice, all this revolutionary stuff, which is caught up in the system. It's caught up in the past. It thinks like it's trying to imagine the future, utopia and stuff, but it's all caught up in like changing the past and being in this system of stuff. It just seems like
Nietzsche identified this problem. He basically he said like God is dead and I killed him without a religion, without some like orienting or orientation upward. You either become a nihilist or you join in on some type of utopian social movement. Yeah. And so that's what they've all done. They're all like on some like utopian like pulling society to some like undefinable, ambiguous utopia in the future, which is what they're doing.
Is your agnostic atheism a way of keeping yourself oriented upward, oriented away from dead belief systems?
I'm kind of a nihilist. So.
Okay, so you slip into the nihilist camp. Yeah, are you really though?
Well, I kind of like. Functionally, I'm a nihilist, or like theoretically, I'm a nihilist. But the way I kind of motivate myself, or the way I accomplish things, is I derive joy, or I derive purpose out of basically like stretching like the possibilities of like what I think I can do, which means oftentimes taking on more than I can handle, but just constantly saying like, okay, how much more can I push?
So kind of an Ubermenchian kind of thing, like.
We'll see. I'm also only 24, so it might be different later on. I'm just kind of trying to get through school.
That is a very, very profound act of humility and self-reflection. I'm only 24, so like I don't need to define myself at this time. Like I can use these categories. I can kind of notice how I am, and I can use these categories, but I don't need to define myself right now. We'll see how I go. I'm going to get through this thing. That's refreshing, and I think that's also a part of like the realism that probably guides you away from or protects you from the idealistic temptations that are wreaking havoc upon your generation. Why the right side of history? That's got to be tongue in cheek because you can't believe in the right side of history because you can't be in a.
It's TM. I'm mocking them.
Yeah, yeah,
They say like, oh, like, we're gonna be on the right side of history. So I'm like typically like posting like absurd and like horrific things they do with right
yeah,
side of history TM above the post.
yeah,
So it's like, look, these are people on the right side of history.
yeah, yeah. Right. Great troll. Thank you very much for your time. You're refreshing. You're doing great work. Get through your schooling. I can't wait to see how you develop, and I'll link people to your socials. Is there any like book recommendations or something that really that you were really fond of that really helped you or like really woke you up?
This is a book written by a leftist, but I recommend the Social Gospel in American Religion.
Okay.
That especially if you're a Protestant, because the social gospel and postmillennialism has affected American Protestantism in more ways than people realize. And so I think, especially people in church, like, because this is, I know, like woke is taking over a lot of Protestant churches, especially like non-denominational mega churches. And so I think people need to be more aware that this is actively happening. People are actively like trying to push this into religion.
Yeah, because it came kind of from religion.
Oh,
Yeah.
so yeah. Well, I mean, Hegel was a theologian. He got his like doctorate in theology.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Excellent. I had no idea where we were going to go. I'm so proud of this episode. It's so fun. You really helped me make sense of things. And I knew all these ideas, but to interface with you and to have you like kind of lay them all out, like kind of brings more like insight into this very stupid cultural little conversation, but it does have wider implications because it is a pattern of behavior that is perpetuated over and over and over again. And I've been witnessing it. So to have you help me like map it out has been really tremendous and enriching for me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. And you have a good weekend.
You too.